Chris, you going to pull up the presentation? Or you
All
want me
right.
to?
Looks like we are back on live stream. Is that right?
Yes, you're live.
Okay, we are back. We have just concluded the closed portion to review cybersecurity findings, and we are going to continue with a presentation on the summary of audit reports and follow-up activity and recommendations for letters of concern. So I will turn it back over to Brian. Thank you.
Thank you again, Brian Tanner, your legislative auditor. For the record, with me is Christine Tamanis, my deputy legislative auditor, who will be doing most of the talking during this presentation. I'll jump back on at the end just to talk about the letters of concern and concluding remarks. This is our typical end of the year summary of the activity. We've consolidated. It used to be separate little individual presentations. We've merged it all into one. And we've changed it a little bit just to give you a flavor of some of the overall activity that we've had over the course of the year. And in order to get us done within that 2-hour timeline that we talked about, I'll turn it over to Chris to start the presentation.
Thank you, Brian. Good afternoon, Senator Hettleman, Delegate Solomon, and committee members. OLA's law requires that we conduct various types of audits, as we show on pages 2 and 3 of the presentation. A majority of our audits are fiscal compliance audits conducted every 3 to 4 years. And on page 4, we included a few brief statements on the confidentiality of our reports. On page 5 is a summary of our reports issued during fiscal year 25. OLA issued 68 fiscal compliance reports, as well as 23 special and performance audits. Each fiscal year, we conduct an analysis of fiscal compliance audits, which includes the latest audit report for each agency subject to audit, generally every 3 to 4 years, and this represents our rolling audit cycle. On page 6 includes a graph for the most recent 6 fiscal years that highlights the number of audits conducted, current audit report findings, and the percentage of prior report items repeated. As of June 2025, 34% of findings were repeated in the first subsequent audit. This percentage has continued to increase again. 10% were repeated in 2 or more audits. And for perspective, OLA has not seen repeat percentages this high since just prior to 2010. On page 7, you'll see that about 1/3 of our findings in the most recent audit cycle relate to program compliance in areas such as background checks and licensing. Information systems and procurement and disbursement findings comprise over 40% of our findings. OLA audit reports routinely identify potential or actual losses, often resulting from agencies not having comprehensive procedures. We've highlighted several examples of losses identified during fiscal year 25, starting on page 8. For example, in the Maryland Department of Labor Office of the Secretary report from April 2025, MDL could not support accrued federal fund revenue entries totaling $204.7 million, including $67.6 million, which MDL had determined was not recoverable. In the Prince George's County Public Schools report from March 2025, OLA identified critical human resources and payroll transactions were not subject to a documented independent supervisory review, and this resulted in one employee being overpaid $7.4 million without immediate detection. On page 9, in the Maryland Department of Emergency Management report from May 2025, MDEM did not ensure federal reimbursement was obtained for all public assistance grant expenditures, resulting in the failure to recover $691.6 million timely and lost investment income of $19.2 million. In the University System of Maryland, University of Maryland Global Campus Report from August 2024, UMGC did not adequately monitor an IT project being developed for its use by ventures, which was ultimately determined to be unusable and abandoned after UMGC expended $25.7 million. In the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services, Incarcerated Individual Healthcare Contracts Report that was from November 2024, DPSCS did not assess the mental health contractor liquidated damages totaling about $10.5 million between March 2022 and January 2024. And also liquidated damages were not properly calculated for the medical contract, resulting in DPSCS failing to assess damages of $809,000. On page 10, we're highlighting the effects that agency vacancy rates can have on establishing controls and resolving audit findings. 24 reports issued in fiscal year 25 had vacancy rates over 10%. OLA identified 14 of these where vacancies may have contributed, at least in part, to the findings in our report. On page 11, OLA has 2 audit follow-up processes in place for repeat audit findings. And page 11 shows an overview. Since our reports include repeat cybersecurity findings, we no longer identify the specific audits in our presentation. Page 12 highlights recent results on the follow-up process for agencies with 5 or more repeat findings. As required by law, agencies with 5 or more repeat audit findings must provide OLA quarterly status reports until satisfactory progress has been made on all findings or until the next audit begins. There were 6 audits subject to the quarterly status report process during calendar year 2025. Since this process is still ongoing and subsequent audit reports haven't been completed, final conclusions regarding agency's progress in correcting these repeat findings cannot yet be made. Page 13 of the presentation provides recent results for the JCR follow-up process that restricts funding for agencies with 4 or more repeat audit findings until corrective action is taken for all of these repeats. The April 2024 JCR contained budget bill language restrictions for 5 agencies with a combined 25 repeat findings. Based on OLA's review, these agencies had not fully resolved the findings, with about 60% of the collective findings still in progress. The budget committees did not release the restricted funds for these agencies. OLA is still reviewing the reports submitted by the 4 agencies included in the April 25 JCR, and we will report our conclusions to the budget committees during the 2026 session. In addition to these agencies, there were budget language restrictions in April 24 and 25 for cybersecurity related findings. And on page 14, I'll turn it over to Brian to discuss our recommendations for letters of concern.
Before I jump into this, I just want to highlight or reiterate, Chris highlighted some examples of the different losses we identified. It's been asked, can we quantify the losses that we identify over a given year? And it would sound like an easy task. The problem is that trying to put something out in a way that's fair and accurate is challenging because you have it includes 2 extremes. Sometimes the losses we identify are based on a test of 10 items, but the agency may have processed hundreds or thousands of transactions. So if we were to include amount, it would be understating the impact. On other times, it's a potential loss, and so we don't know what the actual results are. And so we tried to give you a flavor of some of the specifics. Obviously, the more egregious ones end up coming in front of you as far in a committee hearing, but we tried to highlight some of the ones that may not necessarily have been presented at a hearing for your attention. Moving on to the letters of concern, there are 6. Yeah, six letters that were recommending for the committee. Briefly to go through each one. The University of Maryland Global Campus, the biggest issue there was the outsourcing of certain activities by the creation of ventures and outsourcing their IT and data analytics units. Since that time, we're hearing through the press at least that they've decided to bring those entities back in. I would encourage a letter of concern asking for some information about the reintegration of those resources, such as the cost, the timing, and the impact on staffing. The Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services healthcare contracts was the subject of a hearing, and there was significant concerns with the healthcare being provided to the inmates that were identified. There were new contracts that were being identified at that time. Since that time, or at their most recent at their testimony, they indicated they have new contracts with a new structure. I think we're hearing that perhaps the amount of liquidated damages being assessed may be increasing. While that may sound positive that the state is recovering some liquidated damages, unfortunately, that comes at the expense of healthcare being provided in accordance with the contract. And those liquidated damages may or may not be covering the costs of the services that we may have to go out and get to provide those services. So I would encourage a letter asking for an update on the new contracts, statistics on whether or not the services are being provided, the liquidated damages that have been assessed, and whether or not they're covering their actual costs to provide those services. Regulatory services we just heard earlier this month, and I think it would be beneficial to send out a letter of concern asking for an update on the complaints issue, the investigation of the complaints, and the process to move forward to consolidate some of the functions to enhance the controls both over fiscal and IT operations. Department of Juvenile Services, I think a letter of concern is warranted for the first two findings in that report. One was in addressing OIG deficiencies, and I think we should ask for a status update on that. And the second report there was background checks, or the failure to get background checks in some of the vendors, including one individual that was identified with a criminal background check at a vendor. I think the letter should be sent out asking for an update that the department has on those two efforts, including what was done with the one employee that was identified. Baltimore City Register of Wills was included in our SIU presentation earlier. They disagreed with almost all the findings and provided little to no details in their response. I think the letter should ask for specific responses to each of the recommendations to ensure that the activity identified in that report are being properly addressed. Last but definitely not least is the Department of General Services, which had pervasive disagreements and or misalignments, if I use the department's term, was the result of a lot of concerns. I do think we need to send out a letter of concern asking the department to reconsider their response to each of those recommendations and provide an update on the status of implementing the recommendations included in that report. This concludes our report. If I could just summarize, the bigger concern is both the number of findings and the number of repeats seem to slowly be increasing in recent years. We do think that vacancy rates may have contributed, at least in part, to some of those things. One thing is Chris highlighted some of our follow-up efforts. We don't, at least at face value, most recent case was SSA. They don't seem to be having a significant impact on improving the overall implementation of our recommendations. We're going to continue to monitor these trends and report to the committee on the status of those findings. And that concludes our recommendation with 2 minutes to spare.
Thank you very much, Brian. Thank you, Chris. Senator Lamb.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. A quick follow-up question to Mr. Tan and the team there. Thanks for the presentation. So I think it is a little concerning that we're seeing the number of repeat audits continue to inch upward. I know it doesn't look like we have Joan Peacock and her team from DBM here who are supposed to be monitoring this, but any recommendations there? Any thoughts on whether that unit is staffed up appropriately? Can DBM help with some of these departments that seem to have repeat audit findings? Because it looks like it's going in the wrong direction.
So I don't want to speak on behalf of Joan. I think one of the things, if you're asking me for my personal opinion, is a general concern. You see it with DGS and the most recent hearing, is the definition of what the role of an oversight agency is. and what controls they should be asserting over the agencies for the responsibilities that have been delegated. We saw that concern would do it. We saw a little bit of it with DGS in their role of, as the lease manager for these agencies. And it is I think that plays a significant role in addressing. Remember, all the procurement findings that Chris highlighted accounted for about 20% of our findings. Those are delegated procurements. They're delegated by DGS, DBM, ultimately the Board of Public Works, to these agencies. And so I think it becomes, at some point, we need to take a step back and say, these agencies that are responsible for controlling these activities, where do they stand to be accountable? As far as Joan's role, I think if the committee has specific concerns on the staffing, I know the unit has grown. I think they've added a division to not just monitor, but to also assist. The question is whether or not that's being effective is something that I think the unit should have an opportunity to present to the committee. But if you look back to the two recent hearings, let's say SSA, I don't think that having DBM step in necessarily would have been, the answer. More monitoring wasn't, I said it at the last hearing, I don't think it's more auditing that's necessary. I think it's more fixing that's necessary. We provide the recommendations. Ultimately, it's the agencies that are responsible for putting the fixes in place. And I think what we're finding is, whether it's because of a lack of adequate IT or human resources at those agencies, oversight, controls, they're just not doing it. And it's not, if someone goes in and monitors it, they're going to come back and, I think, share the same results. So I'm just not sure that one DBM unit could be the focus point of, should they do more? I just think they could monitor. They could perhaps provide some interim data to the committee or to the executive department on the implementation of the recommendations. But as far as getting the fixes in place, I think ultimately it's going to fall on the individual agencies. And one of the things that may have to happen is, when you delegate authority, sometimes you have to take the keys away from the child that's not using the responsibilities that you've given them properly. And, if an agency is not procuring things properly or not handling the responsibilities they've been delegated properly, maybe we need to set an example, and someone needs to take that responsibility away and give it to somebody who can. But that goes beyond the scope of my.
Okay, thank you. I don't want to belabor the point, but I agree. Although I think DBM, should be there to help or provide resources. Yes, the lead responsibility really lies with the agency at question, but the Jones office exists for a reason too. So I get that. Thank you.
Thank you. And I will just say, we have a new DBM secretary, so it might be a good opportunity to raise some of these issues with him. So thank you. Delegate Ahrens.
Thank you very much. As far as repeat findings, we just had a little bit of discussion in the last session. One of the biggest problems when people aren't doing the jobs they are supposed to do, and it goes right down the line, is the fact that the management isn't working out very well. There need to be processes that need to be continuous, that everybody can actually rely on and depend on from, I guess, from regime to regime, if you will. And that is something that we probably should start thinking about, because the repeat finding are costing us the dollars. And Brian, you mentioned the dollars lost and how that can reflect something. I think it would be real important to just have a clue what kind of money we're losing and what kind of money we're missing. And I think the department should be able to do that. It would be maybe exaggerated one way or the other. But if you look at the budget crisis we're in right now, and you look at what we're not doing and what we're finding in all these audits and repeat findings, I think that's really important. And I want to touch on one other thing, this JCR, where we might take money away from a department. Could you go over that a little bit better with me? Tell me what we're doing with that.
Chris, you want to address?
Sure. So, Delegate, each agent, so the Department of Legislative Services identifies, the representative identifies the agencies with 4 or more repeat audit findings, and then they recommend a certain amount of money be withheld, and the JCR that comes out of the session requires these agencies to submit an updated status report of where they stand with all of their repeat findings, and it's usually due to us November 1st. So we have all of the updated status reports. And then we go out and we verify that information. And OLA issues a letter back to the committees that just advising them where they stand with their repeats. And if all of them are not resolved, typically the committees will not refund that. The withheld money is not returned to the agencies. So we have repeat agencies having money withheld.
I find that counterintuitive, just because you're going to take away monies from the department, which they're crying for people and staffing. You take away money to not do the job. So who do we hurt? We hurt our constituents. Again, if you go back to at least putting quality control in some of these departments, a whole lot better than what we apparently have today, I think you're better served because people actually know their jobs from governor to governor to governor. And we need to start focusing on this. I mean, you can't keep listening to these audits and keep hearing about repeat findings and this being done and that being done. And it constantly goes back to the quote unquote last secretary. And I think that's where we're missing the boat. There isn't a business on the planet that could run like this. Yet we keep forcing this on the constituents and beating up on our tax dollars. I still think I would highly recommend we actually at least have a conversation about this. I don't care how we do it, but it would be great to actually sit down and put heads together to try to eliminate this. But it seems like we just keep going through the same thing.
Delegate Ahrens, I just want to add one thing. I mean, I serve on a budget committee. I served on the budget committee, appropriations committee in the House.
So did I.
During then you will remember that during the budget hearing process, these audit findings are shared with each of those committees. And certainly when the budget is being crafted, they are taken into account. And the JCR report requirement is certainly part of that process as well. So there is another review during the 90 days.
I'd also be remiss if I didn't bring up Ken Weaver, who Vicki had the foresight to bring in to come up with, to try to bridge the gap between what's in our report and some meaningful legislation or some other steps that could be taken to go and address this. Shortly, we should be issuing a report on some exempt procurement agencies to the agencies, which will include some considerations that perhaps can enhance some of those controls, which is something that the legislature perhaps can go and facilitate change. But Ken is here now actively working, looking at each one of these reports for what kind of systemic changes he potentially could recommend to the legislature to help in addressing some of the longstanding problems that we're identifying. The JCR, we follow up on the JCR language. We don't propose the JCR language, nor do we recommend that an agency's funds be returned. We just provide a status on the implementation. It's up to the committee to decide whether or not to release the funds.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Steve, is this your last meeting with us?
Yes, Senator, but I certainly will be checking in as a non-employee beginning in 26. I'm not going to go away. I'll keep tabs and keep aware. But yes, my last meeting.
So I just want to say on behalf of myself and my co-chair, Delegate Solomon, thank you very much for your decades of public service and for your expertise certainly in the cyber area and the SIU unit, and we just really appreciate it. And I hope that you will have more fun things to do in your retirement than watch future OLA hearings.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Hard
you.
to imagine there is such a thing as more fun than this, Madam Chair.
I'd be remiss if I didn't take the opportunity to thank the committee for their ongoing support. During this past year, we've had at least one very controversial or confrontational or disagreeable agency, and it was very warming to my staff to see the complete faith and support that the committee had in our audit effort. We take pride in it, and we greatly appreciate the support that each member of the committee has given us over the past year and for decades before that. So thank you.
Thank you. If there are no further comments, I will say that we are adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody. Hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday season. You'll probably hear from us